Again, I want to welcome everybody to this event. We're excited to introduce ourselves as well as our guest speaker. If you don't know, the Unifying Anthropology Association Online is a diverse group of anthropology majors and enthusiasts, and we're passionate about sharing resources and building a community here at ASU Online. We just do professional networking events, we do community engagement, a lot of guest lectures, as well as fun social events. And you don't have to be an anthropology major to join. So as long as you have an enthusiasm about anthropology, you can just come on. Oh, how about that? I am UAL President Cheyenne Barron, and I also have with me Angela and Jonathan, if you want to introduce yourselves.
Sure. I'll hop right into it. My name is Jonathan, but I also go by John. I'm the officer of communications and design of the UAAO. I'm a history and anthropology major, but I also really like archaeology and really anything tangentially related, and I'm always willing to talk about it. So hit me up.
Hi guys, I'm the Officer of Diversity and Outreach. I'm currently majoring in anthropology and I'm studying in South Korea.
And like I said, I am Cheyenne. I'm going into my fourth year, which is going to be my senior year, and I'm very excited about that. I'm an anthropology major with a evolutionary medicine certificate, and that's just about me. And I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. We also have some of our alumni members we still have Morgan Kemp, she's our graduate president, as well as Jeffrey and Courtney Schaefer. So now I can turn it over to our speaker. We can, if you want to start by introducing yourself or any way you want to start, we're fine with that.
Okay, thanks, Cheyenne. Appreciate the introduction, and it's fantastic to meet you all today. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm really excited to reach out, offer some hopefully good advice and some ideas as you move forward in your careers and your education. Glad to do so today. So let me just go ahead and get started. I am a PhD anthropologist, so I'm fitting right in perfectly here today. My background is in medical anthropology, and specifically psychiatric and behavioral health anthropology. And I also have my master's in public health. And I want to give you a little bit about my professional educational background just to kind of get the conversation started. I have been on a long and winding road to get here. And in terms of my interest to finally get my PhD in anthropology, got it at Case Western Reserve University many years ago. And I worked in the behavioral health field when I first got out of college because I was a psychology major. But I did have a opportunity to go down to the Yucatan as an undergraduate for a month-long field study. A couple people mentioned archaeology, got a chance to check out all the archaeological sites there for about a month. And that really piqued my interest in cross-cultural studies. And I grew up in South Florida, so I had the opportunity to go to the Caribbean quite a bit, even in high school, even for a middle-class, blue-collar family in South Florida. Flights were cheap to get down to Jamaica or the Bahamas back then. And so I did have experiences just kind of engaging with the Caribbean culture there. And Florida's a little bit of a melting pot as well, as you can imagine, with all the different folks coming in from the global South. As I mentioned, I went into behavioral health after college. And I did the full gamut of direct community service, so with people with severe substance abuse, severe mental illnesses and substance abuse disorders. But I decided to go back, get my master's degree in anthropology because I was still very interested in the field, simply because it answered questions that psychology couldn't answer for me. And really it was about the cross-cultural context of illness and healing and health really intrigued me back then. After that, I was at the University of Idaho for a couple of years, and after that, I went back into behavioral health because I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't want to go on with my PhD at that particular time. And I worked for the Oregon Department of Corrections for about 7 years, working in the state's maximum security penitentiary, providing direct mental health services. When I got there the first day, I said, my person I was going to work with, the other mental health professional, and I said, well, he said to me, well, I just got our offices today. He'd been hired there and had been there about a month before I got there. And I said, what do you mean you just got our offices today? Where was the guy before me? And he said, you're the guy. He says, there's not been anybody here besides us in the 100-year history of this institution. It was a little shocker. They didn't tell me that during the job interview. But after several years of that, I did decide to go back to get my PhD, and I actually went back to the institution I worked in Oregon to do my field work. And my dissertation research was funded by the National Science Foundation, which, if you don't know, it's kind of a big deal to get grant money to do your research, particularly federal grant money. And my research question was how the social and cultural context of the penitentiary shapes and contributes to psychiatric recovery for men with severe psychiatric disorders and substance abuse disorders. It's a mouthful, but it's basically saying, how could you possibly recover psychiatrically in one of the most toxic environments known to humans? I don't know how to phrase it, right? It's so shocking to think about now after all these years of that work. Let me just wrap this up because I've got a lot of stories. But after that, I know, but after that, I really I did do the tenure track route, and I tried to get out there and get a professor position. But what I realized is that there's not a lot of jobs in academics or anthropologists, unfortunately. And so I went into consulting. And this gets to the good stuff. This is about business anthropology now. We finally got here. And in the world of consulting, let me give you some idea. And Angela, I'm going through some of the questions you shared with me. So I'm just going to try to hit them and make sure everybody gets the information that they need. So one of the things about federal consulting, okay, that's what I did. And there's a big hub down in Atlanta. Cheyenne, you're in Atlanta. I used to live there. And so I lived in Decatur the whole time I was there, which I loved.
Oh, yeah.
And so I worked for the CDC when I was down there. I had my master's in public health, and I took that as a degree when I was at Case Western Reserve University, not as a fallback, but something to supplement my qualitative research training and a lot of the anthropological theory. So anybody who's into healing, health, et cetera, on this call tonight, the social determinants of health, that's something you should be aware of, right? The idea that social and cultural context shape illnesses and illness outcomes for people. Obviously, we saw that in COVID, right? People who were poor were most affected by it, as one example. So I took the MPH because it was a nice connection, and my specialty in my MPH was program evaluation. And so what that taught me, beyond just the qualitative methods of my PhD program, was being able to engage effectively with what we call stakeholders in government, right? So people just don't clamor to have you do program evaluations for their programs, right? They're not like, hey, we're waiting for an evaluator for years, man. Come on, let's do this. That's generally not how it happens. They see it as a lot of extra work, that you're a judge and you're going to report out all the money they're wasting. There is this kind of vibe, once you start working in communities, because people are suspicious. So if anybody's ever read about any ethnographies, you know that this actually happens when people go into the field and they try to make connections with their research participants. People are suspicious. Who's this white guy poking around asking all these questions, right? So, but program evaluation was something I focused on. So really what you think it is, right? You take qualitative and quantitative measures of people's health outcomes and participate in programs. Mental health programs is my specialty, but you can apply that to any health program, right? And then you write a report based on the analysis that you did, and you make recommendations about how things could be improved or what's going right. Keep doing this. This you might want to change. This you might want to think about in terms of the future. And so that my work for the MPH really got me on that applied track, very much so. So I come from a very untraditional background, where a lot of people I met in graduate school, they went from undergrad all the way to their PhD, and then they left their PhD. But not to be flippant, but not a lot of experience, right? And so that's only gonna, in my opinion, if you're not gonna be a professor, then that really just kind of pushes against your success, really to not have that kind of experience. That's my opinion. That's based on my experiences, but I just want to say that out loud. So I got into working with the CDC with federal contracting, doing some work in the Department of HIV prevention. Oh, what else did we do? Work with SAMHSA to evaluate programs for individuals with severe mental illness on work programs, trying to get people back in the employment sector. All this evaluation work that I did down in Atlanta for a couple of companies. And I think it's important to understand how I might have gotten that job. And those jobs pay good. I mean, they can be very challenging and difficult, but they pay really good. Okay. So compared to, say, for instance, if you're going to be an adjunct professor at a community college or even a full-time professor. And this is what I recommend to everybody here on this call. And you can tell your friends too, that one of the things that I leveraged for me in my personal branding, so to speak, that word wasn't around when I was doing all this stuff, right? That's just a recent conceptualization of people's personality or whatever. That my personal brand was I was a methodologist. And I learned that at my postdoc at Washington University in St. Louis, is that I couldn't get a job, right? I was applying for these professor jobs, and one of my mentors said, hey man, you should really think about pitching yourself as a qualitative methodologist, because not a lot of people know how to do it. Not a lot of people know how to do it right. So I really understood that that was the pathway to go. And I'm going to explain a couple of things why that is. Because if you're writing grants and you're a methodologist, right? I want everybody on this call to think about your steps in let's go all the way back, right, to the scientific method, right? You review everything that's been done before, right? So there's your literature review, whatever. And then you come up with the research question about how to push the field forward, whatever that may be. Okay, and then you come up with your research objectives or research questions, your hypotheses, and then you test them. You collect data, and then you analyze it, and then you write it up, and then you put it out to the world. And that's called knowledge construction. And that's how the world works, right? Not all the time, right? People making decisions all the time, not informed by data-driven processes, as we call them. But that steps I just laid out to you, I'll make it very clear the type of anthropology and the way I think about it is we are social scientists, period. So all this other stuff that people have kind of fought about and all this hand-wringing over the years, are we social scientists? Are we more humanities type people? If you have a great job lined up at an Ivy League school as an anthropologist, then you say whatever you want, you are. But if you're looking for a job, I would strongly advise you to call yourself a social scientist and a methodologist. And being able to articulate that, right? So a lot of the issues that people say, what value can anthropologists bring here? What do you guys do anyway, right? So a couple of things. When I was in Atlanta, working for the CDC and all these other federal agencies, they value qualitative research. So your ability to interview people based on creating a research moderator guide. Here's my questions, here's my probes, here's how long this is going to take, here's how I collect the data, all that kind of stuff, they value that. So if you're in an academic environment, where you're running into a bunch of quantitative people saying, what do you guys really don't do research, right? Just talk to a couple of people and write a 300-page book and it's over, whatever, right? That they are very uninformed about how the world works in terms of research, because anywhere you're going to go outside of the academy, people are going to value that. In the business world, in federal government, they send us grants and said, Joe, you're going to write the qualitative methodology section. So I'd recommend you taking a look at some methods books and making sure you kind of understand what that even means, right? When worst thing that someone tells me if they say they're a qualitative researcher is, I code for themes. I'm like, okay, you need to tell me a little more than that. Because if you write a grant, or if you have a federal stakeholder who's like the director of SAMHSA in front of you, you're going to have to provide a little more information than that, right? So that's what being a methodologist is all about, though, knowing that minutia of how you go from step 1 to step 2 and to get that analysis completed. And you should be able to articulate it perfectly. every time to make sure that you ever hear that phrase, explain to me like I'm in kindergarten? That's what you should be able to do with qualitative research every step of the way. And there's a lot of great books. The one I'd recommend, H. Bernard Russell and Jerry Ryan wrote a great book about it that I used a lot. So that's a really good one. And then Margaret Roller, she's on LinkedIn quite a bit, but you could use her book as well, ROLLER, Applied Qualitative Analysis. So that's my claim to fame, is that I pitched myself as a methodologist, and it worked because people said, hey, but the other thing too is I could write grants and I could work with quantitative people, because you should be able to identify, like, you should know the empirical. I won't say we are empiricists, but I'm just saying the quantitative method, right? You should be able to identify research objectives. You should be able to identify independent and dependent variables and how they work together, different types of independent and dependent variables, like continuous data, like would be continuous data on blood pressure, right? And categorical variables would be like gender. Right? You should be able to articulate that and be able to talk to a quantitative person and say, I think that gender drives blood pressure, right? So the independent variable would be gender, and your dependent variable would be blood pressure. That's basic stuff. You should just know that, right? And that'll help you engage with other people and talk about your research, and at least be able to say, hey, I'm not some whack job. It's just spinning fantasy, right? I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so that's how that works. So let's get a little bit into business anthropology. I gave you a little bit on how to pitch yourselves and some of the skill sets that you should be working on.
Dr. Galanek, before you go forward, can I ask you a few questions from when you gave us a little bit about
of course. I have a tendency to just barrel right through the whole hour. So you just stop me.
Good, though. One question I did when you mentioned how because once that I'm going into the medical anthropology field, so I was really excited when you said that. I was like, I'm gonna get some tips. But
that's great.
About graduate school, I hear a lot that you have to really narrow down your interests, and I've struggled with doing that because it's like so many things that I find interesting. How were you able to narrow down what you really wanted to focus on in graduate school and like postgraduate, to kind of just get it all, so you won't be all over the place? Do you have any ways that somebody can do that, or any tips for that?
That's a great question. Yes, if you're going to go on to a master's degree or a PhD in anthropology, medical anthropology, they will ask you to say, what do you want to do, right? What are you going to focus on for your master's thesis or your dissertation? Well, there's a few ways it comes to you. You're just interested in things. You gravitate towards things just because of your interest in your life experiences, right? So that can happen, and you can also be very strategic about it. With Google and Bard, right? All these AI searches, you could literally look up, what is what's the hottest topic in medical anthropology, and then your second question is, how many jobs are in that area, right? So you could be very pragmatic about it also, and say, okay, like that if you research, AIDS in Africa, you're going to be qualified to work at an NGO, right? People will pick that up, right? So there'd be one example. If you are into opioid death prevention, right, among certain subgroups in America, or wherever field site or country or culture you're interested in, or something that the drug prevention agencies might be interested in, right? So it's really a combination of kind of what you're inclined or interested in. And I always tell people, read as much as you can, in the field, and also just watch the news a lot. Be careful what you watch, though. But you know what I mean? Like, the topics and major issues of our society are constantly at play for us to observe and interpret. And so that's a way to get an understanding too. But it also doesn't hurt. And also it helps to take a look at the conferences that are being given professionally, American Anthropological Association. Just kind of look at the topics, see what people are talking about. And one thing I always tell people too, a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, behind a paywall. I don't know if you folks are experiencing this, but you can always contact the person who did the research. Say, hey, I'm a student. I'm interested in what you talked about last year at the AAAs. Can you send me the paper? A lot of times they do, or they'll have their graduate assistant do it for you. So I keep your ears open, keep your eyes open, be pragmatic, but also think about what really you're passionate about. I know that sounds so corny, but really what you wake up to every day and you're like, hey, this is cool, man. And I just had a chance this week to be writing a proposal for one of our clients in e-commerce at the company I work for. And I love it. I love coming up with research objectives. I love writing about methods. And my day just went by like, wasn't any kind of like, oh, this is so hard and I hate it. It's like, this is what I was born to do. So that's a way to think through that.
Okay. And then my second question was, before Jonathan, I've always heard about consulting, but I've never really understood what it was. And it's very interesting that you say you do that.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to go into that now, but can you kind of give like a basic definition of what it is and kind of how we as anthropologists could transition into doing that?
Yeah, I think there is different kinds of levels of consulting. I'm a research consultant, not really a management consultant, but sometimes they use those phrases interchangeably. As an example, if a company who wanted to, I don't know what people's specialty areas are, but say for instance, somebody here on the call tonight is really specialists in Guatemala, right? And health in Guatemala or something like this. Like it's feasible that a company wishing to expand into the Guatemala market would say, what do you know about that? Or can you write us a 30-page white paper on that to give us the pros and cons and recommendations for that? So a research consultant, what I do is basically a company. I work a lot with large e-commerce companies, Fortune 100 companies right now, and also the CDC and SAMHSA, as I mentioned earlier, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. They don't have the capacity to do a lot of research. Often they have enough people to come up with the idea of what they need to accomplish the next 5 years, but they don't have like the boots on the ground to get it done. And financially, it makes more sense to them rather than hiring like 20 or 30 researchers every year. So it's a financial issue too, that people don't want to have like these permanent researchers on staff. It's like, yeah, we'll just get a third-party vendor to do it. And so a consultant is basically, there are independent consultants. I'm not sure I'd recommend that. That's a hard road. In order to get a contract every year, just a one person, you got to upkeep your website and all this other stuff, whatever. But there are many, many companies. I work for AnswerLab, which is a tech consulting company. I'll get into it in a minute. But and some of the companies I work for down in Atlanta, ICF, some multi-billion-dollar international consulting firm. They consult on everything, anything from utilities companies to nutrition in Europe. I mean, it's crazy the amount of stuff that they do. So a consultant, you work for a company and it works just like academics, where every year you write a bunch of grants for your salary. And so depending on the environment that you're in, if you don't get the grant, you may not have a job that year. That's the downside. So there's a little pressure. But if you work for a good company and then there's a lot of action, so to speak, in terms of people reaching out and the company's doing well, then you can do it. I'm kind of used to it now, so it doesn't really bother me. I just write the grants, write the proposals, whatever, and just do it. So, but that also goes back to my grant writing skills that I learned my postdoc at Washington University in St. Louis, would focus on federal grant writing. So I practiced a lot. So it comes kind of mostly easy. It's still pretty hard. So does that help everybody? And so if you're not gonna be a professor, you're not gonna work for the federal government, right? You should take a look into consulting and just kind of see what positions are available.
Thank you. I think Jonathan had a question or something to say. Do you still have some question, Jonathan?
Yeah, just real quick. I don't want to eat up too much of your time this early into things. I was just wondering, at least for me, sometimes I wonder how best you would recommend you go about asserting like a balance between quantitative and qualitative skills in yourself as like a researcher, especially in anthropology. Like I feel like all of us here have do have a good balance of that, but obviously the way you pitch it and phrase it when you're talking to a potential employer can sometimes make it seem like you're skewed more to one side. I was wondering how you might articulate the balance that you have for that.
Yeah, that's a good question, John. Really, my perspective on this is if you're an anthropologist, people expect you to say qualitative. So say that, lead with that. because like I said, not a lot of people can do it well. They'll say they can do it, but not a lot of people can do it well. And then what I tell people is kind of what I said a moment ago, which was, and they asked me about quant, and I just say what I can do. I'm like, yes, I can do frequencies. You give me some dirty data and I'll clean it up for you and put it in SPSS and clean it up and do some frequency tables so at least understand what the data looks like, and I can do bivariate analyses, correlations, chi-squares, t-tests, things like that. I said, if you need a logistic regression, it'll take me a couple extra weeks than somebody who's really trained in it. That's what I normally tell people, because I'll have to look it up and figure it out each step to make sure it's correct. So I would do it that way. Be very honest about what you can and can't do, because the problem is, if you say you're a mixed methods researcher or quantitative researcher and people hear quantitative, they'll say, let's get our statistician to talk to Jonathan. Jonathan, you have a couple minutes? And then they'll start asking all these questions and they'll be like, wow, because they know a lot, right? So just be really upfront and honest about your limitations and what you can or can't do. Just being able to do what I just told you, it can be extraordinarily valuable for a company or organization that doesn't have that capacity. So keep that in mind as well.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Cheyenne, do you want me to go on, or did you have any more questions? Any more questions
Yes.
from?
Yeah, you answered. No, I was
Okay.
saying you can. Thank you.
All right, so let me go on. And so right now I want to explain what I'm doing now, and this can also help just folks on the call. And I got laid off in the pandemic. I saw that was one of your questions, Angela. And how it impacted me is I got laid off. So that was pretty awful. So I was working at a nonprofit organization that did tech work. They did tech research for universities. And really cool, because I got to do all this quantitative research. And basically, John, all the stuff I just laid out, the statistical analyses I just discussed, that's what I did. So I didn't do all the regressions. We had a statistician who handled all the heavy lifting. And so I decided at the time that I wanted to get into user experience research. That's something I'd been pursuing when I was at one of the research firms in Atlanta, and I had a chance to do a couple of business projects. Working for a utilities company, doing journey mapping, which is just basically the customers, stages of going from A to B, right, to Z in terms of their journey using your product. And then also I work with a design team to come up with health campaign for sepsis for the CDC. And so I got a sense of what this world was like, and qualitative research highly valued in the world of user experience research. It is a very challenging field to break into because of I don't know why there's so much gatekeeping, quite frankly, but it is a very difficult field to get into because the jobs pay really, really well. And who wouldn't want to work for Amazon, right? Or Google or whatever, right? So, and so I moved into user experience research, and I was able to get in because of my methodology background. Because I was able to say PhD trained in conducting qualitative research. And all that stuff I laid out to you folks when I first started talking, right, about the scientific method, right? You don't need a PhD to know that, but it helps to be able to differentiate yourself a little bit, right? That basically what their assumption is that you get it right every time in terms of your research objectives and your process. And being able to say, I can create the research objectives for a project, I can collect the data, it's going to be perfectly collected, I can do the analysis and do the write-up and make actionable recommendations based on my findings. Just being able to say that puts you right there with people, in terms of an interview process or job application. Now, I'll share a little secret with you, though, is that the methods just get you in the door. So, if you're saying, yeah, I can do qualitative research, and you have a qualitative researcher on the call, we're going way forward for you guys. Let's go to the job interview, right? And someone says, tell us about how you do that. Remember, I told you earlier, you should be able to do that, right? And so then the consulting piece that Cheyenne just asked me about comes into play, which is like, okay, that's great, but what if you're working with some clients and they have no idea what you're talking about? Or what if they're resistant to your recommendations for the research project? Or can you do this analysis in a day rather than 2 weeks? What's your report what do your reports look like? You're going to write some 20-page thing and like there's one recommendations at the end. How do you format that out? So that is when the consulting piece comes in. The methods get you in the door, but then you have to learn to be a consultant. And that's really the world of UXR, because the user experience researchers, they work on design teams creating digital experiences and products for people. And so I'm at AnswerLab now for about 3 years, and I worked on, Alexa and the app, right? You can turn her on and off, and then you can say, paper towels. This thing's paper towels the next day. I worked with the design team who created that. And we investigated like the best place to figure out how to turn the mic on and off and all kinds of different things. I can share that with you. It's already been launched, that particular customer experience. And so that's what you do. And so you really have to bend your methods and your cadence of your work towards like a software development environment, which is extraordinarily challenging. It moves very quickly. There's a lot of people striving to get their voices heard and direct the research and the product development. So it's a whole other world I had to kind of understand. Like, what does it even mean to develop software? I don't know. I have no idea. I was using MS-DOS when I was in college. It was painful. So, the idea of all this other stuff these days, but this is what's going on in the world. And so a lot of anthropologists work in user experience research. Many, many, many do. And so the reason being is because qualitative research is valued. If you have that skill set, that will get you some attention in addition to the other ones I said. But a lot of it is about experience. Like, do you have experience working in a design team? Do you understand the elements of design? And all right, folks, I always keep a stack. I'm a square, right? So I always keep a stack of books on my desk. So here's a good one. Just Enough Research. Okay, so this is really good. Everything I just explained to you is in this book. Hypothesis generation. What sample size would you need for a survey? All this is right here. Just Enough Research, just to kind of work with the team. And the other one I'd recommend to you is this one. This also goes through some of the things I talked about. Think like a UX researcher. And that phrase that I got about methods get you in the door, but then you have to be a consultant and prove that you can consult effectively. That's the last chapter of this book. So I go right to the last chapter of that book. And then if you really want to get geeky and really understand the foundations of good design, this is the book. Okay. And there's 9 or 10 principles of good design. And if you can find them on the internet, right? You don't need to buy this book. But you can go ahead and take a look at your iPhone. You can go ahead and take a look at the menu for Netflix. Go ahead and take a look at the menu for Amazon. You can start using Google Drive, and you'll see all of those things are built into those digital experiences based on principles of good design. And that's what you got to learn. And that's hard stuff. I mean, it's hard for me, but because it's not a world I'm from, right? I was like hanging out in cell blocks, talking to people in the penitentiary about their mental illness. So this is a little tricky for me to make that transition. But that's what user experience is. So basically, you're doing these little experiments all day to help people in their decision making in the creation of digital products. A lot more complicated than that as I'm explaining it, but the field is good in the sense that the jobs are not going away, even though there's a bunch of layoffs this year, but still products need to be tested, and the pay is very good. And you're really at the forefront and the cutting edge of these development things in our society. AI, ChatGPT, BARD, all these things, Midjourney, Runway. This is going to radically change our society in the next few years. And so it'd be good to get on the forefront of that and think about that very carefully in terms of your career planning. Even for people like Cheyenne, you're interested in health. There's digital health experiences. That's a very fertile ground for medical anthropology research, particularly if a company in San Francisco is making the app and they're trying to implement it in Kenya. You can come up with about 100 research questions just based on that scenario, right?
I'm sorry to stop you, but I have a question. So what
Please.
what would be the main difference between academia and industry? Like, if you would like list out some.
So here's some of the main differences. Things move very rapidly in the world of business. You do not have a year to do research. You've got like a month, sometimes even 2 weeks. So this analysis I talked to you about, like it has to be done rapidly. So when I was doing analysis for the federal government and in my dissertation, right, I used qualitative analysis software like Atlas or NVivo. Deduce is something people use, MaxQDA. And it, you would really code for themes and like do the whole thing and the trees and how these things are connected and all this kind of stuff. That's not what they do in this field. In the world of business, they just want, tell me what it means in like 3 sentences and tell me what to do next. So imagine the breakneck speed of that constant. So there's that right there. Things move very rapidly. I would also suggest that there's not a lot of gatekeeping, and there's more of a horizontal kind of way that people think about each other. Nobody at my job cares I have a PhD, ever. I've met people who have bachelor's degrees and have worked for Microsoft for 10 years. They've been at Amazon for 10 years. They're twice as smart as I am for this stuff. And so I think that's the other thing to kind of think through. What I'm saying is a college degree is the most important thing that you can do with your life, period. Okay, so I congratulate and applaud everything and everybody's efforts here. But moving on to a master's or a PhD, yes, it is rewarding and it will upskill you. But in the world of business, it's not as emphasized as much unless you're like a quantitative researcher working for an insurance company. And then they're saying, do you have a PhD in quantitative something? They're like, yep, you're the guy. All right, you're in. So there's a big difference there. And I think working in academia for a few years, I don't know, it's a very different world because people are more in the business world down to earth. They want like immediate results in action. What are we going to do next and how are we going to make money? Period. Right. In academics, it's not like that, right? There's not this mystique of doing research, in business, right? And I think that was one of the things that I experienced in academia, which was like there's a lot of gatekeeping, like, are you ready to write a journal article? Right. Or it's like, I got 2 master's degrees. I mean, how much more schooling do I need to get started on doing A, B, and C to finish my dissertation, right? So I think the skills that you have from getting a college degree or moving on to a master's degree or whatever you're doing, you can never underestimate how these are going to translate into the business world, right? So just being, like I mentioned, just being able to come up with the research objectives, hypotheses, data collection, analysis, being able to write it up, create actionable results, people can actually digest what you're disseminating. That's huge in the world of business. You can be able to do this, particularly if you're cool and you can get along with people and you're a pleasant person to talk to. That makes it even better, right? I mean, I think we've all had those experiences with professors who may not be the easiest individuals to engage with. So in the business world, people just want to make money. And I think that's really important to say that out loud, because this thing where people say like, we want to make sure that everybody can connect with their family through FaceTime. Like, that's not what this is about. This is about shareholder value and this is about profit margins. So don't try to tell me it's not. But if we want to continue to say we're trying to make families happy, that's cool too. I FaceTime with my folks. You know what I mean? So you have to really have this kind of business mindset. And that's what I do now for AnswerLab. After a couple of years of research, I'm now the strategy manager there for e-commerce, which basically means I work with our e-commerce partners to design research for them and create proposals and say, this is what we're going to do, this is how much it's going to cost, that kind of thing. So I'm almost like a grant manager, writing grants, and I'm supervising people to get the work done, marshaling all of the resources for the company together, research operations team who handles like recruitment, participant incentives and things.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I feel like it's like a whole different world if you go into like business. So yeah, I think it's like their way of thinking is a lot different. I think, yeah.
It can be. In academics, you're just like pushing knowledge, right? You're pushing the boundaries of knowledge. And in business, it's like, how much money did we make last quarter? How much money did you make us last quarter? So there's a big difference there. So, but if you can accept that and that's what you want to do, I've accepted that, and that I'm in this world now, and I'm satisfied completely. I mean, I feel like, my colleagues are good to work with, and I like the work. It's challenging, it's stimulating. So,
Yeah. Is there
go ahead.
any episodes you would like to share about UX designs that you have worked with? Like,
It's
yeah, if you would like to share.
Yeah, it's hard to, because I'm under non-disclosure agreements with most of the partners that we work with. But one of the things that we work with some of our partners is currency conversion, which is very challenging. It's a software product that would, convert currency on a website. So if I'm living in the US, my family's in Mexico, I can purchase items that are in pesos or American dollar, and then in my credit cards from Mexico. But then I also have a bank card, debit card for my US bank account, right? Think of the complexities that you have to navigate then on an e-commerce transaction. So I work with a lot of people that do that kind of thing, because with this global, cliched as it sounds, this globalized economy, people are doing that, right? So, it's very important to understand that commerce transcends these artificial nation state boundaries we've created. And so that kind of stuff is very complex space, as they say. Let me just give you one more example. I can talk a little bit about Alexa, because all that stuff's been launched. One of our projects, we did it remotely, was imagine a Zoom call like this, and we had people having their Alexa device in their living room, and we were asking them to do tasks, and say, can you do this? And they would turn and try to touch it. Like, you can't touch it though. And I'm like, because they were trying to improve the customer experience. I'm not sharing anything that you don't already surmise, because Alexa's everywhere, right? And so really they want to make sure that CX works really good. So they're trying to understand how people use it. And this is like where some of the ethnographic work or participant observation work comes in. We were watching people use it, and trying to understand and document and take data on their behaviors, observable behaviors of what they were doing with it and how they were interacting with it in order to improve the customer experience. So that's the kind of interesting things that you get to do. Work people through prototypes. So imagine a real complex software app that you would never use, and your job is learn this in a couple of days, how this thing works, and then come up with a bunch of research questions to ask people about it. So I had some challenging experiences just trying to learn software. I'm like, how does this work again? What does this thing do? And they're like, when are we doing the sessions? And they're like, oh, we're doing them in 2 days. You can learn this and come up with a research plan by then. I'm like, I better download the app and put my credit card in to learn how to do it. So there is a lot of that where it's very challenging sometimes if it's not something obvious like Amazon or Google or something, where you're learning like very complicated things in software, like financial services companies like American Express or whatever. Like some of that stuff's very complicated, what they're testing and what they're trying to improve upon. And that can be a challenge in the field, just kind of learning that stuff.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the episode. Yeah, if you could go ahead and continue. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to look through some of your questions, Angela. Thank you. So the other thing too is like entry-level jobs, internships, or how would you, if you're interested in working in business, what you could do. So internship would be really awesome if you could get one. I'm not sure about internships available for like UXR, for instance, but let's just talk about that a little bit since I'm in that field. What I would recommend is do some research on the field. You can take a look at those books that I shared with you, but UXR is everywhere. And you could look at a lot of the software companies that create user experience research tools, like usertesting.com. Again, with Bard and ChatGPT, you can just look this up. You just put in user experience research tools software, and it'll come up with a list of things that people use. And they do a lot of blog posts, and they do a lot of email distribution lists that you can get on and just get some insight into what's going on in the field. Look for internships there. Internships are, like I said, they're hard to come by. But as an example, depending on where you are, you could work for a small company, right? If there's some company that needs something done that's not Google or Amazon, certainly you could take a look at that. And a lot of small companies do have people on board to do work. You could also do, I don't ever recommend doing free work, but sometimes it works out, pro bono work. You know, if you go to a website or something and from a local business or something, and you're like, yeah, this website stinks, you could always contact them and say, hey, why don't we do some pro bono research for you? There's a guy named Krug, Krug, and he did a book called Rocket Science. I don't remember the rest of the title, but he talks about doing usability testing, where you test a software or an app or something to see if the principles of design have been applied effectively to it. And then you point out certain things about how the CX can be improved. That'd be an example of some pro bono work that people do. You know, saying just go to a website for a local nonprofit and say, let me just do an analysis of your website for free. The other thing that you could do is get on LinkedIn and be active and start following people, which I do a lot of, and you can kind of like review what people are posting all day. People post articles. You can just read a lot. I'm old school. So to me, a book is more important than listening to a podcast any day, because I can digest things much more rapidly when a written word. So I always read a lot of articles online. And you folks here are very fortunate because you have access to all these extraordinary software tools to do this research for you. You know, when I got done with college, it was just like, I don't know, do you know anybody? So here you could actively research and direct your career at very early stages by just doing the research. You know, you want to be a researcher. Here's step one. You know, what jobs are available for UXR, for anthropology, with a bachelor's degree in anthropology in the world of UXR? What tools do I need? What books should I read? What companies are hiring? What do they pay? And what are some skill sets that I need to build up for myself? Be very cautious of boot camps because people get ripped off. But there are a few that are valuable, like design assembly, I think is one. Look at people's LinkedIn profiles and you can see what certifications they've got. And if they have a job and it looks like a good company and they went to a design school for like 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something, then it's probably legit. So that's another way to measure that. And it doesn't hurt to have those skills. All those things I talked to you about learning software, working with a software development team, they teach you that in there. So, but you got to, and they'll teach you research methods as well. But you got to bring something to the table. At least you know what they're talking about. I don't think you can learn that stuff just cold. I don't think.
So kind
Dr.
of,
Galanek.
you can go ahead, John.
Okay. I was just gonna say I've been very interested in what you've been talking so far with like UXR and stuff like that. Before I went for my bachelor's in anthropology currently, I actually got my previous associates from a technical college in game design. And I'll admit to a degree, I've been kind of like hesitant to share that with some people just because I don't know, I just feel like it carries certain connotations. But I'm wondering in what ways and to what degree you feel like it would be good to leverage my experience with like user experience and things related to that going into something like this, or just generally any suggestions, or if you want to make it more broad because there's more people than just me here, feel free.
No, John, it's fine. I give you a real quick advice here. It just make sure to broadcast that and figure out what you learned in that program and your takeaways from that, because gaming UXR is huge. Right. So being able to understand how the games are developed, being able to understand the flow of a game and where some pain points would be where something doesn't work or people can't do what they think they need to be able to do at a certain point in the game. That's like user experience that people want tested. So that if you're thinking, and it's a robust field, so I would never hide that if that's what your passion is, because it's better to broadcast that if that's something that you're interested and passionate about.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Shine, did you have a question?
Yes, my question was related to when you were talking about your how the different in like environment and kind of mentalities were when you switched from talking about academia versus business. And I was wondering, is there any way, because to me, like sometimes I think about going in different fields and it kind of feels intimidating because you are dealing with different types of like a different environment. So do you have any advice for how to get comfortable and like feel more confident in your work when you're going into something new?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cheyenne. It's hard. I'll tell you flat out, it's hard. and I've been in a lot of different environments, and not all of them have been very welcoming for whatever reason, you know. And so I think going into the business world, let's just talk truthfully here. There is sometimes an expectation, depending on the business, of how you talk, how you dress, what school you went to, all this stuff that just kind of makes me cringe and just recoil and disgust, right? But the other thing that I'd point out is that things are a little different now than when I was in school, right? Looking for a job after undergraduate. And my experience working with the big tech companies like Google and Amazon, you kind of come as you are, right? And people are okay with that because it's a younger demographic of people working in these companies who are more accepting, of people who may not fit the business mold, so to speak, of like JP Morgan Chase or American Express. And I think you've highlighted a very important question that only anthropologists can answer effectively, right? Which is about diversity and how people think about it, right? Not implementing diversity initiatives. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how people think about it, right? Like, is this a welcoming environment for me? Or is this not a right place for me? Jonathan, you mentioned games. Would that be of a value to broadcast if you wanted to interview for American Express? I don't know, right? But if you were going to work for Activision, sure, right? So, and then Cheyenne, also the things to think about too, is that I'm just going to give you advice, even though it's unsolicited. I say just be yourself, and you will find the place for you. I know that sounds like a Hallmark greeting card, right? But I wish I would have done it earlier in my career than trying to like figure out what people were into and kind of holding back my personality at times or whatever. You're getting the full me today because I don't care what people think of me anymore, right? I mean, it's easy for me to say, but at this stage of my career, but I really think that, and I really think that if you got the skills and you're sharp and you know what you're talking about and you know how to let people know what you're talking about, then you'll find the right spot for you, right? And you'll feel it immediately. Like, that didn't feel very welcoming during that interview, or if I did that internship, I didn't feel very welcome. You'll feel it, and then you just know. And in my opinion, that's just about going through life, your life experiences, and just saying that didn't work out for me, but this place was great. And the other thing I'd point out to people, we have a very nice diverse group of folks here that I can see right now, is that nowadays a lot of people, you can find companies that value that, and they put that on the table. Whether it happens all the time, whether it's true in practice, we don't know. But I know for the company I work for, you can go on our website, AnswerLab.com, and you can see all the diversity initiatives that we have and how we value that. And it's a very diverse company. I mean, I'm in a minority as a white guy working at the company. Work mostly with women all day and very diverse people. So I think it's important to find a niche of where we're comfortable, and that's okay. To think like that. I really do. And I wish I would have done it sooner, and thinking about things like that. Like, where are my people? Where are the people I feel most comfortable with working? That's not to say you don't want to work in a diverse environment and get those experiences and understand people. But some places just aren't good. Some places are toxic. And it's important to recognize that in the business world, right? Someone can make you work 60 hours a week and treat you poorly. That's not the place you want to work, right? Or who's in the leadership positions of this business, right? And what are their expectations, for how I should dress or how I should act, or people judging me, because of the way that I speak, right? All those things are very important, I think. So don't ever let anybody push you around and you think that that's your only option, is to work in a place that you hate and in a context that's unpleasant. You'll have a heart attack. So I hope that answered your question. I put a lot of personal opinion in there too. So
yeah, no, it definitely helps. So we are kind of closing in on the hour. Are there any like closing remarks that you have, or anything else you want to address while you're still on here?
Yeah, I guess I just want to thank you, Shane. I want to say, first of all, thank you for having me here today. But I also want to reiterate a few things that I mentioned just to kind of bring it on home for the folks at home here. So think about all the stuff I told you about. We're social scientists, and you should consider yourself one, and you should be able to use the scientific method at every turn in terms of your work and your career, and know what that means, and know how to say it out loud and have it have meaning when you do say it, and know about creating research, all those steps I just shared with you. As an anthropologist, your greatest skill is being a qualitative researcher, your ability to immediately build rapport with people and put people at ease who are different from you, and being able to elicit information and narratives about their life. That's what anthropology is. That's what it does. And all anthropology is psychological. It's asking people about their thoughts and their feelings in the context of their environment. And the other thing to think about in terms of business is all those skills you've learned about research and being able to implement the scientific method and all those things I talked to you about, that will bolster your career in business. You just have to find the right business based on what Cheyenne and I were just talking about. You have to find the right business for you. And as a qualitative researcher, user experience research is a great place to start, really to think about how I can leverage my skills, and also consulting. At Cheyenne, you're in Atlanta, so you know there's CDCs down there. And so being able to take those skills out of the academy and put them out into the world and be able to say with confidence, I'm a social science researcher, I'm a qualitative researcher. If you have a research problem, or you need a program evaluated, or if you need a software development, I'm the person for you, because I can implement the scientific method to aid you in decision making. Because whatever I come up with, you're going to have recommendations that you can act on that are data driven. If you say that out loud to somebody, that's pretty powerful. So I guess that's my wrap up for our discussion today. But don't forget all that other stuff that you're learning as well, like biological anthropology, race as a construction and gender as a construction, and how we got here from 150,000 years ago, painting in caves in France, et cetera, et cetera. That stuff is so important, and that just enriches your life as a human out in our society. So when you see a bunch of BS in the media, a bunch of stuff that people are saying that's garbage, as an anthropologist, you should be able to say, that's junk science. 100 years ago, Franz Boas demonstrated why racists are just basically ignorant people. They were measuring skulls, and he said, that's not how it works, right? So all that stuff you need to keep in your minds all the time as anthropologists and people who are passionate about the field. Even if you go to a company and they never ask you once about it, that's just going to make your life more interesting in the way that you experience it.
All right, so that was a great way to wrap up. Does anybody else have any questions they would like to ask before we end? Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, well, another way, what's the way people can get in contact with you or learn more about your work?
Well, I'd start with LinkedIn.
Okay.
And you can just go on my LinkedIn page. You can hit me up for a connection. I'm glad to do so with anyone. And then you can also go to Google Scholar. Two of my big articles are for you to download from my research in the penitentiary. So you can just Google me. I know that sounds corny. You can Google me, and you can find a bunch of stuff about things I've done in my career. But the LinkedIn page is probably a good start to look at a lot of my work, because I have a lot of my articles linked. A lot of my research for the CDC is linked there as well. So you can just kind of start there, and if you have any serious questions, you can always email me. I think you have my email, Angela, so I can send it to people. It's fine.
All right, and thank you. This has been our interview with Dr. Joseph Galanek, and we like to thank everybody for coming out, and thank Dr. Galanek as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.